You are listening to a Raptors podcast, the place every week for all things Raptors. Get ready and never underestimate the heart of a champion. Welcome back to a Raptors podcast. I am your host, as always, Lucky Roberts. I come back to you after 3 games in this past week. Raptors go 1-2 in that stretch. They are now at a wonderful record of 9-11, which is sort of, exactly where you would expect them to be. They start out the week with a loss to the Nets, which was looking to be the easiest one of the 3 games upcoming. And, you thought the worst. And I still do think, 1-2 might actually have been the worst outcome, because as the season goes on and we dip further and further below 500, and I know it's only 2 games, and I know it's only that, you continue to see it slip away from us, the playoffs, and you see a slip away from a spot that even if we were in that spot, I don't know how happy I'd be. Like, we're 2 games below 500. If we were at 500, I wouldn't be satisfied. I mean, this team, it's not even good enough to be a play-in team. We're 1 spot outside of that, and we don't want to be a play-in team. We don't want to be happy with mediocrity, and that's something that we're going to, because Masai is never going to ever tank, and that's something that he's made clear, and something that I think he's reiterated in his most recent interviews is we're going to try our hardest, and we're trying to build and grow this team, which is understandable, and I get that totally. But if you're looking at it economically, which I know it's not economics, it's a sport, but you look at something that Orlando has done, you look at something that Oklahoma City has done, you think that's what you want to emulate. You want to get a bunch of top 5 picks, and maybe you ring out a couple, but you need to get multiple shots at it. And I trust this front office to draft good players most of the time, but not everybody's going to get it perfectly. And you want to give yourself the best chance for that. And I don't think we do, being 38-44 every season. And I don't think it's fair to the fans to watch and have those expectations. And, the expectations are lower this season because of that. And you are seeing growth from certain players, but it's not entirely what you would want or expect. And it was fully shown in this Nets game where Toronto hung around, and the Nets aren't a good team. The Nets are below 500 now. But they hung around against the Nets team and then completely lost in the fourth, letting up 40 in the fourth. And it's another game where you see, the best Raptors only have 17. Scotty sort of has slumped of recent. He had a great bounce back game against the Knicks, so I can't say that in total confidence. But, he from his hot start with the first handful of games, he's cooled down a little bit. He's still scoring more, he's still assisting more, but his plus minus has dipped a lot, especially earlier in this week and to the end of last week. But he's still putting up the stats, still had 3 steals in this one, 11 rebounds. But you just see, if he has an off game and Siakam has an off game, this team can't score more than 100 points. Like, it's really, really tough. OG is OG, and he's not going to improve anymore. He's 26 years old. He's reached his full. I mean, he's probably 27 actually. He's 26. But he's turning 27, and I think we've seen what we're going to get from him this season. He's already taken a dip points per game from last season. I think his defense has actually improved. He's been locked down on every single player. I mean, you saw it in the Suns game that I'm going to talk about to you next. But he locked down Devin Booker and completely took him out of the game. And it's one of the reasons why the Raptors won that game. But it's an improved Raptors offense is still, the Raptors just don't have good enough players for a good offense. And we have to develop players that we have, and we don't have any players to develop. We have Scotty Barnes, and we've developed him. We need more, especially where the NBA is going. These teams that are winning are nine guys deep, and their top guys are MVP candidates, and they're nine, 10 guys deep. Where if you look at, the early 2000s, if you had a Allen Iverson or if you had a Kobe and a Shaq, you're upset. You could put whoever you wanted around them. Even just having an Allen Iverson was enough to go to the finals. But, it's not anymore. And you need a team and you need to build and you need shooting and you need everything combined in the same spot. Because every team has a star. And so it's like, oh, awesome. We have Scotty Barnes. We have Siakam. OG's a great defender. Dennis Schroeder is a worse Fred VanVleet. uh, Jakob Podol is the 25th best center in the league or whatever he is, 20th. Our bench is non-existent, and it doesn't matter how well these players overachieve. It's, with that as your starting point, there's nothing else you can build with. But and sitting at 9-11, I think, the only place to go is blow it up, and it's to go Nuketown. And obviously, Masai can't say that because he'll lose his leverage. And I'm hoping that's what he has sort of realized, is that he's saying everything he's saying in the press to convince these other general managers that he is like willing to ride out another piss poor season. And he has been capable of doing so. So I think the threat is credible. I just hope that's what he's doing and he's not actually riding it out, because in reality, I don't want to watch 36 and 44 for the next 10 years. And I think I don't want to ruin Scotty's future, and I don't want to piss him off and make him leave as, I don't want to compare the two, but they're sort of comparable. I mean, they're both fourth overall picks. Sorry. But Chris Bosh, we had like an 8 seed with him. We were bad the rest of the years, and he left. And he was a great player. He won multiple championships, but he left us, and I'm afraid that the same will happen with Scotty. And if we don't start the rebuild now, if we start it now, at least he won't be caught offsides when in 3 years we started, or 2 years, or even a year from now would be off by a substantial amount in how quickly we should have started. We should have started this rebuild 2 years ago, but when we first drafted him is when it should have been started. But it was a retool, and anywho, it was in this game more specifically, Chris Boucher with a great play off the bench. He and Gary Trent were the only bright spots. Everybody else sort of just picking up minutes. Malachi Flynn, Achua, Josh McDaniels. Precious Achua we're trying to develop, but he's not really getting us anywhere we need to be. He's turns the ball over. He drives like he's OG Anunoby, which is the worst quality you can have. Constantly off balance. He has these flashes once every blue moon where he's dunking all over the court, and he's hitting threes. He's moving the ball a little bit. He's got a little bit of defensive prowess as well, but at the end of the day, you know what you're getting from Precious, and he hasn't grown in the 3 years we've had him. And you can say the same thing about Malachi, but Malachi, I feel like there was less expectation of anything because he was the 28th pick. Precious he's end of lottery 20s. He was a much higher pick than Malachi Flynn was. And the other thing was we traded him for Kyle Lowry, and we traded Kyle Lowry for him. So I think there was some expectations around him to develop something while being on the Raptors. Anywho, we lose to the Brooklyn Nets. They really just have a bunch of players who can just go off, and some nights they do and some nights they don't, and that's what works for them. They're very similar to the Raptors, where they don't really have one star, and they're a mismatch of a bunch of different guys, and they need to sort of pick a direction. And so we'll see. And another thing is, we can try to contend this year, but if we don't get a top 5 pick. We're losing our first rounder, so it doesn't matter anyway. Like if we don't decide sooner rather than later to tank. So anywho, Raptors bounce back after losing to the Nets to win against the Suns. And, this was sort of the return in the Raptors cycle of a loss win. We're so back, everything's over. So this was a nice bounce back win against the Suns. A full strength Suns team. Kevin Durant had a great performance. Him and Scotty Barnes dueling this one out down the stretch. Scotty Barnes had a great fourth quarter to win this match. It was Siakam, Scotty both playing super well. Once again, OG 13 points, whatever. He had great defense on Booker, who had his worst game of the season, I guess. He was 2 for 12 from the field, 0 for 4 from 3, only 8 points. He had his 5 rebounds and assists, but he was negative 15 as a whole, plus minus wise. And outside of Kevin Durant and Yusuf Nurkic, though, Yusuf Nurkic, for every point he scores on offense, he's putting back in his own net about 15. Like, he's a piss poor defender. Still don't understand why they traded. Like, they had DeAndre Ayton. He's a really good, he's a strong defender at least. Yusuf Nurkic hasn't been a good defender ever. And they're, in my opinion, comparable offensively. I would argue Ayton is better, and I understand Nurkic fits better with the style of basketball they want to play or whatever. But even still, you can get way more value for a player of DeAndre Ayton's caliber. At least, former first round pick. He has played well enough to get himself a max. So, it's just interesting because they basically traded a dollar for a dime. And I understand even still this season, DeAndre Ayton's not been up to scratch. He's dropped about 6 points per game. He's still rebounding at a great rate, and it's for a poor Trailblazers team. Even still, the salary you're paying him, Nurkic is getting paid a lot of money too. So you can say what you want. I still wouldn't have made that deal. And at the time, his value, DeAndre Ayton, his value was way higher than just Yusuf Nurkic and a bunch of minimum players. And I think that's going to come back to haunt them. But anyway, it was a strong performance by Podol. He was 9 for 8. Scotty Barnes, once again, like I said, down the stretch was running the show. He had 13 in about the third, and all of a sudden he just piled it on in the fourth, scoring, he had a couple of threes, 1 3, a bunch of free throws, and he put himself, his imprint on the game. And that's not something you always see. And you can see, maybe Darko sort of got in his ear and was like, dude, we need that Scotty all the time. Because when you look at this Knicks game, we saw the Scotty that I want to see. And he was, from the get-go, putting buckets in from wherever. He was 13 of 19. He hit 3 threes, 29 points. He and Siakam once again played a great game bouncing off one another. This game doesn't get a single free throw. He does it all from the field. It was a much stronger performance. Schroeder continues to cool down from his hot start. Podol is bouncing back in a big way a little bit. He had 12 rebounds in this one, but the Knicks were in the driver's seat the whole second half, basically. And this Raptors offense is just not good enough, and the defense is acceptable. But even, you look at the players we have, and you're like, okay, we'll be a great defense, but everybody can score 120. Everybody can score 110. The Raptors can't score 110 points this season. Not consistently at all. And any other team worth their weight in salt can do that. So it doesn't matter if we're playing good defense against the Knicks, we're holding their stars to 20 points. Well, they still scored 120. We still scored 106. It's just not sustainable. And the offense is something that we thought we were going to be fixing when we got the new coach Darko in. And I'm gonna stay a believer of Darko, and I think he's a really good developmental coach. I think he's proven that with his time with OKC and all over the place. But we'll have to see how he develops as a coach, how he develops his ability to develop these players. Um, that's going to be his real challenge this season. And, when you're developing players, you're going to lose games. And I think to fight against that is sort of the wrong choice. And the front office has been making a bunch of poor choices as of recent. Um, I think this indecisiveness is going to come back to haunt us in a couple of seasons when, man, remember when this guy's value was here and what have you, and remember when this guy's value was the moon? Like, I don't think OG is going to fetch nearly what he was going to fetch last season. It doesn't look like Bobby or Masai are learning from their lessons because they continue to do it with Siakam. They continue to do it. They did it with Fred. Um, and it was another, you look at the Suns and you look at the Knicks game. Once again, Achua had a better game against the Suns. Even still, Gary Trent has had a horrible game against the Knicks, giving us nothing off the bench. Achua the same thing. And they were the two bright spots against the Suns. And, okay, that's what the bench is for, but you're getting nothing from your bench, guys. The starters are fine. The starters are acceptable, but our bench is the weakest in the league, it seems, because, outside of Detroit. Like this can't continue if we want to win games. And like I said, I don't think I want to win games anymore at this point. I don't want to try unless we're actually going to win. But if that's what we want, we can't have this lack of you know output from our bench. So anyway, looking ahead to our next week, we sort of have a nice little break here in between the New York and Miami games, which is on Wednesday, to sort of realize what we're looking at for the rest of the season. The So I'm only gonna have two games for you next week. It's gonna be Charlotte and Miami, both winnable games. I'm sure. I'm not buying Miami hype. I know they have shown that they've been consistent, more consistent than last season for sure in the regular season. I'm not buying the hype on Miami. I think it's a winnable game. It's at home. We can win against Miami. It's off of a nice break. We've been being able to prepare for it for a while. And then we have Charlotte on Friday, another game that's very, very winnable. I mean, if we lose to Charlotte, I think that should be sirens around the house. Blow it up, please. But we will see. But, on the whole, it's been a disappointing season so far, and we can see ourselves falling into mediocrity. And that was the main point I wanted to get across today as the Raptors fall to 9 and 11. Um, and we'll see how it continues to develop. Only two more games. So if they're both wins and we're 11-11, maybe I'll be a bit more optimistic about the outlook of this Raptors team in the future. But who knows? Who knows what'll happen? Um, I'll continue to rep this team. So I'm going to take a quick break, and we're going to look around the league at some of the top teams, who's winning, who's losing, and who's going up and down. And we'll wrap it up quickly, and I'll have you guys on your way. So I'll see you guys in a sec. All right, and I am back, and I'm here to talk about the NBA standings across the landscape. Um, Top of the East, similar to last week, we have the Celtics, Magic, and Bucks, all at around 15-4, 14-6 for Magic and Bucks. And you can see the Celtics are just this monster, and you saw it when the Raptors played them. They're just you can't stop them. They're shooting an insane amount of threes. The only team that's outpacing them in threes is the Indiana Pacers. Um, out Outpacing them in points per game as well. But this Celtics team is special, and I think I can see some growth as a whole team surrounding them. And they might be at least my pick in the East at this current moment to get out. Um, it's they've been around there for the past couple seasons, and they're a real contender and looking like a true competitor for the Nuggets and anybody else the Western Conference could throw out there. And you see the Magic, who've had a great start to this season. They're 14-6, same as the Bucks, and they've been on a heater basically for eight 8 games now, 9 games. I mean, in their last 10, they're 9-1, just losing their most recent one. Um, they've just been on a heater, and once again, when they played the Raptors, they showed who's who, and the Raptors can be sort of a test for any team worth their salt. And if you want to be good, you got to beat the Raptors bad, and you got to show them that you're in a different league than the Raptors, at least, because you see the Raptors hang around against like teams like the Hawks, against the Cavs, against the Nets, against the Bulls, but against the Pacers, even the Knicks a little bit. But Magic, Celtics blew them out. Raptors did beat the Bucks, but 76ers blew them out. Bucks beat them out, blew them out the second time we played them. So I think that is sort of something I use to gauge almost around the NBA is, are you absolutely walloping the Raptors? If so, you're a good team. If not, how good are you really? and so if the Raptors can stick around, what's going on, really? But you look around and you got the 76ers lost 2 in a row. They're joined right beside the Knicks, who have been on 3-game win streaks. So they're both sort of one team fading, one team flying. Um, and to round out the top six, you have the Indiana Pacers, who, like I said, have been averaging 128 points per game. Just an insanely fast paced team and exciting to watch, but also, you know, they lose a little bit for how much they're scoring. Uh, the Miami Heat also, 2 games above 500, as well as the Cavs. Um, we'll see how the Raptors play Miami on Wednesday. Like I said, it can be a little bit of a barometer to see how good the Heat are. I'm not buying it at the current moment. We'll have to see. They sort of eke out these games, and they've done it for a couple of seasons now. They're just eking out win after win, losing by big margins and winning when they really need to. And we'll see. The Cavs, after starting slow, they've picked it up a little bit once again. But once again, I think the Heat, the Cavs, the Nets, the Hawks, the Pacers. Somebody's gonna have to separate themselves. Some of these teams are gonna fade, and I think it has been 20 games, but when you're at 500, 2 games of 500, it's sort of hard to tell exactly where you stand. And so it's going to be important for these teams to cement themselves over these next 10 games, over these next 20 games, before we get to the halfway point to see who's real, who's not. And we'll have to see. So you have the Heat, Cavs, Nets all over 500. The Hawks 1 game under 500. And then following right behind them is the Raptors, who are 2 games under. And even if we do get in 10th, like I said, I don't think I'll be too excited. And right behind the Raptors, you have the Bulls, who have won 2 in a row, still very far behind in this playoff race. I think they're done, and everybody else believes so. But they're catching up to the Raptors somewhat. The Hornets, as well as the Wizards and Pistons have lost 17 in a row. Haven't won in November. Haven't won in December yet either. 17 losses in a row is absolutely disgusting, and the Wizards aren't too far behind, and 1-9 in their last 10. As we move to the Western Conference, it's topped by a team you wouldn't have expected, but I mean, since last week, you probably could have expected. It's the Timberwolves leading. They've won 4 in a row. Very strong last week. At home, they've just been crushing it. They're 9-1 at home, 6-3 away. Timberwolves, Chris Finch led Timberwolves team with, they've made it work with Cat and Gobert, and Anthony Edwards obviously is the one who's made the step. But like I said, they're one of these deep teams, and they've got a really solid lineup. They've got Naz Reid coming off the bench, and they've got all these different players that you look around and you're like, oh, that's a guy. He can put in a job, and it's something that the Raptors are lacking. We don't. I would love to have a Naz Reid off the bench, and you can compare him to Chris Boucher all you want. They're not the same player. So I think that's something. And Oklahoma City, once again, one of the younger teams, they're falling here in second place. They're tied with the Nuggets, 2 games behind the Timberwolves. Um, Oklahoma City, another super young team with an emerging young shooting guard, who's taken the brunt of the offensive load, and in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Oklahoma City, and they're proving themselves to be taking the step this season, taking that leap. And the third team in this sort of top three in the West that sort of have separated themselves is the Denver Nuggets. Obviously, Jokic still very, 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 very good. Still with his foot in the ring for MVP, and they're healthy, which is something that they haven't really been last couple of seasons. Obviously, they won last year, but they weren't healthy for most of last season, and so it's nice to see a fully healthy Nuggets team, fully locked in, and we'll have to see how it goes. To round out their sort of contenders contending for a automatic playoff spot, we have the Kings, Suns, Mavericks, and Lakers. They're all sort of around 3.5 to 4 games, very, very close between all of them. The Phoenix Suns would have thought they would be higher. All these other teams are sort of happy to be there, I think. Lakers fans, at least, would think that they were higher. This is exactly where I thought they'd be. 7th place. I think, in the West, I think that's exactly where I expected to see them. Kings continue to surprise themselves, and they might be kicking themselves that they gave away such a good player as Tyrese Halliburton. But I think if you gave them 11-7 and first in a playoff games, impressive wins against the Warriors last season in the playoffs, they would trade just about anything for that. So, I don't think they're too upset at this current moment. The Mavericks, I'm surprised, and I've been very surprised with what I've seen from their offense, and because it wasn't working until the end of last season, and obviously there was just entirely, it was just a tank job, is what I should have realized. They completely bottomed out, and that's what the Raptors should do right now. But they completely bottomed out with Kyrie Irving and with Luka Doncic to get their first round pick, and it seems to have worked out, and they seem to be a legit team this season, and the Lakers are lining up in 7th. The rest of the play-in teams in the West, you've got the Pelicans, Clippers, and Rockets. Pelicans sort of in their own weird 8th place where, they're not as good as the Mavericks or the Lakers, but they're not as bad as the Clippers, the Rockets currently, who are looking so impressive, have fallen back to earth a little bit, lost 3 in a row. It's really, really interesting home and away splits. Rockets 8-1 at home, 0-8 away. That is a incredible home field advantage for the Rockets. Just a huge swing. So hopefully they have a couple of home games for their cause coming up. But the Clippers and the Rockets, yeah, they made some additions. They were a really bad team last season. Made a couple additions. Got Ime Udoka in. Sure, 500 team, understandable. Clippers, what is going on? You guys, what do you keep just clicking the button, do random things like that's gonna change anything? It's not. You're 9-10. You gotta make it. You gotta make a change. You gotta make something. You gotta, and that's the thing they've been doing is making a change. But I think they've been making a change to be good, and you have to recoup some of your assets that you gave away for trading for all these guys. But I do think, you can't trade James Harden. You just got him. You can't trade Westbrook. His values is in the dumps. You have to trade Kawhi and you have to trade Paul George. But even their value is a shadow of what it used to be, what they could have got. And that's the trap you see the Raptors falling into. But they're in the plan, and they're going to be convincing themselves that they can do something, anything better. But who knows? Outside is the Golden State Warriors, who are in a similar position to the Raptors, 9-11. They're sort of outside of their window. Steph Curry continues to be, the best point guard ever, but even still, not much you can do. They're 3-7 in their last 10, and they're sort of falling out of this picture entirely. And it'll be interesting to see what they do, because I think I can see them blowing it up similar to the Raptors pretty soon if this type of form continues. And then you have the bottom four in the West. You have the Utah Jazz, 7-13, sort of the Bulls of this situation. They're going to try to convince themselves that they can win some games. They're not going to win any. Trailblazers, Grizzlies, Spurs. Grizzlies waiting for somebody, John Morant, to come back. Spurs are the Pistons of the West, lost 14 in a row. And the Trailblazers, it doesn't look like their Scoot Henderson pick has been as successful as Wembanyama. Anyway, even though Wembanyama is on a putrid team. That is going to do it for a Raptors podcast. Thank you so